Alright, something that really pisses me off and has done for many years now is hearing people critiquing Italy's involvement in the Six Nations. The kind of snobbish, up-nosed condescension that people seem to exude when talking about the Italian rugby team, and Italian rugby in general, it just really rubs me up the wrong way, with this clip on the live coverage of the 2021 Six Nations by Sam Warburton being sort of a tipping point for me.
I think there's got to be a change, and it's not just throwing your toys out the pram off one game. For quite a few years now, Italy haven't really been competitive. I personally think that there's got to be promotion and relegation in the Six Nations, and say if it was last year, for example, Georgia, who won the second tier competition, we can't keep putting the glass ceiling on these teams in Europe, because how do we know what the growth in Europe is going to be like if we constantly have that glass ceiling there? If that's the case, if Italy come bottom, say Georgia win, I think in the next international window, Georgia should travel to Italy, so they still get home advantage and another chance to stay in the competition. Then you have a playoff game to get into the Six Nations. That'll get some pretty good TV viewings, I'm sure. I'd love to see that. So I think enough's enough now. Italy just don't have the strength and depth from a player pool point of view. They're just not good enough to compete at this level right now.
Now, before I say anything else, ITV did a very similar thing during their post-match analysis of Italy's game against France, and that pissed me off too. This isn't a Sam-specific grievance. I'm really annoyed actually that I have to use Sam as an example in this video. I really like Sam Warburton. From what I've seen of him, he seems like a genuinely lovely bloke, an unashamed lover of heavy metal, and someone who usually comes correct whenever he speaks in public, and his opinions are usually well thought out and not the usual waffle you can get from some people on mainstream coverage of rugby or just sports coverage in general. Different conversation. Anyway, I actually genuinely hope that he becomes the new face and presenter of all BBC's coverage, because I think he'd be perfect for that. But this kind of broke my brain. For a combination of reasons. Firstly, the context surrounding when and where this was said. The fact that this was said on the BBC on the opening weekend of the tournament, the day after the Italians lost convincingly to a really good French team, when interest in the Six Nations was probably at its peak for those who casually view the game, especially since England lost to Scotland on the previous day. Now, if you're wondering why this matters, it's because in my opinion most people get their opinions on things they don't have much knowledge about from other external sources. For example, how basically every documentary I've watched about nature has informed my opinion about whatever subject they're discussing, be it hunting, pollution, or the zoo industry. I'm not informed enough on any of that stuff to have my own perspective, so whatever narrative the content I watch gives me, to a certain point I'm going to agree with it if it ever comes up in small talk. My brain will just naturally revert to what I've heard, because to me at least they're a reliable enough source. Now, the reason I bring this up as an example is because this is even more prevalent in sports. It's the entire point of experts or pundits or whatever you want to call them. They are an avenue to help give information to the audience so that they can better understand the goings on of whatever sport they cover, as most people haven't had the experiences or haven't got the time to be able to get into the nitty-gritties of whatever sport they enjoy. And you can probably see where I'm going with this now. This take that I've heard multiple times on air, with different pundits saying different versions of the same thing, which is basically, Italy aren't improving, it's boring to watch, it's a pointless game whenever they play, this comp needs changing. And then giving their hot takes about what the solution is. The examples usually given usually fall somewhere between the most kind way of thinking, with a relegation system similar to the Bundesliga, where the winner of European rugby's second tier competition, probably Georgia, will face Italy to see who gets to play in the Six Nations next year, which Sam suggests. Or the other side of the coin, where you have people who just want to scrap Italy being in the Six Nations altogether by either swapping them with Georgia or just having it go back to 5 indefinitely until either Italy or someone else gets better, probably Georgia again. But in my opinion, all of that is such short-term thinking. If you look at the history of Italian rugby, their timing just hasn't been quite right. If you take their more modernish history from like the 1980s on, they've always just been on the periphery of the top teams of the world, consistently beating the likes of Spain, Romania, Germany, but never quite as good as the Englands, the Australias, the All Blacks. And whenever they'd punch above their weight, they never really had the luck or opportunities to capitalise on their success. When they had what you could maybe see as their golden generation of players, where they beat sides like Fiji, Argentina, Ireland, France, and came within a disallowed try of beating England, they weren't in the Five Nations, as it was called at the time. They came close when England did that deal in 1996 to have all their games on Sky, and England were basically threatened with being swapped out for the Italians, but that never came to pass. And that golden generation, by the time Italy were going to be brought into the top tier of European rugby in the year 2000, they'd sort of aged out of their prime, and the success that had brought them to the dance basically wasn't able to properly show its head again. And it's been sort of an uphill struggle since then, with them getting the odd wins against Scotland, Ireland, France and Wales between 2000 and 2001, but no real consistent success, which is fine and was to be expected. But I believe the reason for Italy's perceived lack of growth isn't because they haven't been improving, far from it. They're improving at a very steady pace. The real reason, I believe, is that Wales, Scotland, Ireland and France have all improved drastically, especially Scotland, who are probably the most like Italy in terms of resources out of the other nations, and used to be the game that the Italians would target as the one they could win. But now all of the other teams have become teams that can give the best teams in the world a game on their day, and could genuinely win, and it wouldn't be seen as a massive upset. I believe the reason for this improvement across the nations is twofold. The coaching over the last decade in the Northern Hemisphere has just gotten to a way higher standard, Vern Cotter being the catalyst for Scotland's resurgence, with Gregor Townsend building on that foundation beautifully. Obviously, Warren Gatland's incredible work with Wales and the Lions, Joe Schmidt's incredible transformation of the Ireland team, who unfortunately just seemed to peak at the wrong time, and of course now the French and English, who have crazy geniuses at the top, who have completely changed the way each nation feels about their rugby team since they took charge. All of these men are generationally outstanding coaches, and will be looked on in the years to come as people who literally saved Northern Hemisphere rugby from falling behind. Italy just haven't had that. Not to say they haven't had good coaches, they just haven't gotten the luck or had the timing of a country like Japan, as that's what you ideally need to get yourself from being thought of as a team as an easy win for the big boys, to being a team that competes at the top level. And weirdly, another example of this is Scotland's recent transformation. You basically need back-to-back world-class coaches. With Japan, it was Jones and Joseph. With Scotland, it was Cotter and Townsend. You need sustained excellence at the top of your organisation, one to set the standards and the other to build on the foundation and evolve it. But that's easier said than done, as you probably already know. And further on, you also need a second thing, which weirdly the Italians actually might be en route to having. At least a couple world-class players in key positions to lift and carry the standard of the team over the years. To me at least, the ones who did that in the Scottish team were backs Finn Russell and Stuart Hogg. Others would come in after, but these two specifically, I believe, were the catalyst to a new standard of player in Scotland. Their mere presence in a team will always give you, at the bare minimum, hope that you can nick a game. In Japan's case, they got lucky by at least having 5 by the time the 2019 World Cup came along, and some fun flashy players as well. Now Italy, in my opinion, at least have one world-class player in the emergence of one of the best young fly-halves in the world, Paolo Galbisi, who has guided Treviso to their first ever piece of silverware and now has made his big move to Montpellier. But as many of you already know, Italy have had a single world-class player as their talisman, and it hasn't been enough, no matter how dreamy his eyes are. Galbisi being a 10 helps though, with how much influence he can have on a game, but he will still need more. And I think he will get more. I have my dreams of Paolo Odogwu coming to play for Italy and being a genuine game breaker for them at 13, but the more sure thing lies in Italy's under-20 team, who are actually the reason I felt like I could finally make this video. The Italy under-20 team in this year's under-26 nations in the first round lost 8-25 to Wales, and so you would think that's business as usual, another hard-fought game, but they were outclassed. But if you actually watch the game, it was really competitive, with the score being 5-13 at half-time, and then they went on to lose narrowly 13-11 in a game that they could have and maybe should have won, then thrashed Scotland 43-0, beat Ireland 23-20, and then lost to the eventual Grand Slam champions England 27-17. That is so exciting. For the first time, Italy have had a crop of young players on par and at times stronger than the other Six Nations countries. And this is why Italy being in this competition is so important, and why that line of thinking that Sam Warburton's comments allude to really pisses me off. These things take time and luck and a bit of magic, but we all claim to want rugby to be a bigger sport. Well, this is how you do it. You give people and nations opportunities, and in time, this is the result. I'm not saying Italy will be world beaters, but I am sure that they will keep improving, and that the Six Nations, or whatever it will be called in the future, will have a competitive Italy team in the future. You just have to give it time. Rugby is very good at marketing itself to its own circles, but for this game to get to the point that I want it to be, and what rugby thinks itself to be, it needs to keep growing and expanding around the world. It's a fun game, and we are barely scratching the surface of what it could be. Oh, and if you think I don't want Georgia in the Six Nations, I want them in as well as Italy. That's how Italy got to where they are. All Tier 2 nations crave being able to play the bigger nations on a regular basis. And yes, it would probably end up with people again complaining about pointless games. And to be honest, who cares? Because if it increases our chances of getting to a point where we see another supposed smaller rugby nation reach the quarterfinals of the World Cup in the future, and there are more and more kids in the world playing rugby and enjoying the beautiful game, then it's worth it. Also, those games would probably be used kind of like how we used the Summer Nations games this year, where they're sort of just games where you can blood in people who you're thinking about bringing into the international fold, so I just see it as a win-win. I think part of the reason that those comments infuriated me so much is that The line of thinking ignores the future potential of what this sport could be. Not just what Italian rugby can be. Their success in progressing as a serious team, if it works, can be used as a template for growing the sport. And after sort of seeing a lot of experts dismissing them and basically saying, this isn't worth it, that doesn't sit right with me, and in my opinion isn't correct. I have stewed for this for literally months because it's a bit of a hot take from me, and I usually steer clear from any sort of American sports pundit style, defend your corner like your truth is the only truth and everyone who disagrees with you is an imbecile. But I've genuinely had this on my mind for a while, and I believe what I'm saying is right. So much so that I'm willing to go out on a bit of a limb here and disagree with probably a large group of people, including my dad. Sorry, father, you chattereth shite. Anyway, that's it. I hope Italy can build on this under-20 success, and if you haven't already watched the games for yourself on YouTube, they're great fun. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Stay safe. Signed NGJ.